Welcome back. You're watching our CNBC TV 18 special as we discuss the strategic imperatives for India to take on China when it comes to the One Belt, One Road project. And I'm going back again to the Dawn report, which says that part of the plan, and I quote, the Chinese government will strengthen safety cooperation with key countries, regions and international organizations, jointly prevent and crack down on terrorist acts that endanger the safety of Chinese overseas enterprises and their staff. How concerned should we be about not just the economic aspects of the CPEC, but the military dimensions that were raised here by Jaidev Ranade? And if this is indeed a fait accompli that's been presented to India, how do we now respond?
Well, they've had a de facto alliance. China and Pakistan have had a close alliance, and that's now assuming the open dimensions of a military alliance. That's what should have been expected, and that's the direction it's going. But where China, I think, geostrategically may not be calculating correctly, is that even though they paid a lot of attention to President Putin, he was given great importance there, but even the Russians are worried because the Eurasian part of the Belt and Road Initiative requires the Russian cooperation, and the Russians don't want Chinese dominance in Central Asia. Also, what is happening in Riyadh, just on the eve of the Beijing summit, where Pakistan is happily joining a Sunni alliance, where President Trump will be coming, will have the Iranian hackles up. So if the Iranians are offended and the Shia triangle is offended, then I think Chinese are dealing with a divided Islamic world between Shia and Sunni. And that's where India then gets a toehold, which we haven't had for a while. It'll be very difficult for the Chinese to really have their Eurasian connections if the Iranians and the Russians are not completely on board. So some of the dissonance will come later. But I think at the moment it's all sugar and honey, because they're saying 3 divisions of Pakistan, metals and minerals in the Baluchistan area, textiles in the Punjab area, petrochemicals. It all sounds very good. But where is the manpower? Where are the skilled people in Pakistan who will man all these factories? And ultimately, the market is going to be India. So Chinese also realize this, and therefore I see a little climb down. The Chinese statement has not been aggressive. They've said that the sovereignty question, China has no desire to in any way affect anybody's sovereignty. Now, there the precedent of the 1963 agreement between Pakistan and China is there, because when the Sakshgam Valley was ceded, they have in that agreement said this is subject to the final settlement of the dispute between India and Pakistan. So something of the kind, the Chinese can address that, but Chinese will also have to cede something to India, which is that they'll have to stop making noises about Arunachal. They'll have to start settling the border issue with India. They can't expect India to surrender sovereignty issues and yet not give an inch on their side.
So, Hassani, specific recommendations in terms of how India ought to respond to the strategic changes that we are seeing on account of the CPEC. I mean, Prime Minister Modi is going to be visiting the US shortly. What should the response be there when he meets with President Trump? India and Japan have the Freedom Corridor. What should the response be when India is dealing with Japan? Perhaps to try and get them to support us much more in terms of what happens with the CPEC. What should the strategic imperatives be now for India?
Well, certainly if India is seeing its strategic goals challenged on a very, very aggressive basis by China, then India will have to make that its main goal. But I would beg to differ with a lot of what the participants on this show have said. I think India needs to focus on its own growth and see in what way it is able to. Some of this I do want to ask, it does seem to be a little contradictory and confusing. India is a co-founder of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. That is the bank that is going to be asked to produce the loans and certainly to fund and support many of the projects on OBOR. What are we going to do? Are we going to tell Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, I'm sorry, we are not willing to support these? That's the first point. What is India's antagonism towards this going to mean for our allies who are otherwise allied to us but do feel that they want to be a part of this project? The second question, in a month from now, Prime Minister Modi is going to go to Astana to Kazakhstan to join what is called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization organization, which includes China, Russia, the STANs, the Central Asian states, and now Pakistan. India is going to become a member of it. The SCO openly endorses the Belt and Road Initiative. So is India now going to be a part of an organization that endorses the initiative, but India is actually going to come against it? The third part is, I think, the zero-sum game we have been playing in terms of with the US. Remember that 3 months before the CPEC, we tied up with the US when it came to the South China Sea, when it came to a joint vision statement to protect the waters of the Indo-Pacific. The fact is that zero-sum game has gone away, as I think a lot of the participants have said. Mr. Trump is no longer seeing this as India with the US versus China with whoever China allies with. I think there is a shift. Japan is seeing that shift. Australia is seeing the shift. It's high time India sees that shift as well. So I think what we have to do is move away from this idea of constantly being under siege and see where we can find opportunities, build on those opportunities. After all, we have just upgraded the dialogue with China when it comes to Bangladesh and Myanmar to build the BCIM corridor. Are we going to step back from that now? So the real question is, if India is in favor of connectivity, if India is in favor of more connectivity leading to more growth in the world and prosperity for it and its neighbors, then we are going to have to walk out of this siege mentality and deal as Asian leaders.
Walk out of the siege mentality and deal with the world as leaders, Jaydev Ranade. The contradictions Suhasini Heather pointing out.
I think her comment has got some very serious contradictions. Firstly, you can't ignore the fact that your sovereignty is at stake. You can't, it's not a question of either or. It's not either sovereignty or connectivity or either sovereignty or economic benefit. You can have both. The question is, how are you going to do it? First, you have to make it clear to the other party that there are going to be costs if our sovereignty is going to be trampled upon. And I think that is the message that we have conveyed. Second, the Chinese analysts...
What will the costs be?
Well, I'll tell you, the One Belt, One Road, whether it takes off, I think it's going to be very difficult unless India joins it. India has, if nothing else, a spoiler quotient which it can use, and China is well aware of it. Chinese analysts and strategists are pointing that out in the context of the maritime Silk Route, which is a major part, mind you, of this, girdling the globe effort that is going on. And as far as the land route is concerned, we are the biggest market. So, they are looking at us. And that's the first cost. The second, I would say that we must accelerate our relationship with Japan in the maritime domain. And I would not look at the US-China relationship as something like instant coffee. It's Trump is playing his game. Xi Jinping is playing his
game.
After all, at the summit that they just had, there was no agreement. It was the only Band-Aid agreement was this 100-day thing in which China has agreed to import US beef and they have agreed to buy a lot of oil. So it's a transactional thing.
Brahma Chulani, final words from you.
But let's see what India can do. It's okay to expect what the US and Japan and others can do, but what can India do? Here I wish to point out that India has quite good economic leverage vis-a-vis China. The total cost of the China-Pakistan economic corridor is less than 1 year's trade surplus that China enjoys with India. That trade surplus has doubled from 30 billion 3 years ago to nearly $60 billion today. We have allowed this trade surplus to balloon, undermining our own leverage vis-a-vis China. China employs economic leverage in its diplomacy all the time. Currently, they have unofficial economic sanctions against South Korea. Earlier, they used economic sanctions against Mongolia to achieve political ends. The Chinese companies that are engaged in the China-Pakistan economic corridor, especially those companies that are engaged in various projects in Gilgit-Baltistan, should not be allowed to operate in India. We should use various tools that we have in the economic realm. China is not using the economic tool against India because it knows that the leverage is with India.
Sure, so leverage our economic might, so to speak. But Suhasini, a final comment from you before we close.
I'll put it very shortly. I think the sovereignty question has to be first. It has to be tackled. It has to have India give China the alternatives by which they can actually be a part of this. If not, I think India has to work towards not closing windows, not closing opportunities, because make no mistake, if 68 countries have decided in the world to be a part of this, if the UN Secretary General and the IMF chief and the World Bank chief in America and Japan and other countries who aren't even a part of it are coming there to say that this could be the project of this century, then India can't just sit it out. India must have a position, and my position is that India should be one of the leaders of it.